Welcome to the Mental Health Boot Camp podcast.
Woo!
Hooray!
This is the podcast where four psychotherapists, three of us Canadian, one of us American, serve you cutting-edge mental health knowledge. I am Dr. Ryan Howes, a clinical psychologist from Pasadena, California.
And I'm Dr. Brooke Lewis, a registered clinical counselor from the greater Vancouver area.
And I'm Joanna Boyd, a psychotherapist from Port Moody.
And I'm Chris Boyd, psychotherapist from Coquitlam.
Welcome back, everybody. We were off last week. It was St. Patrick's Day. I believe people had stuff to do on that day.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
There was a live music, which is wonderful. I think we maybe talked about this in a podcast prior, but yeah, St. Patrick's Day up here is a bit of a big deal. Like there's celebrations everywhere, and then the Celtic dancers, like all the dance troops, circle between everywhere, whether it's like pubs or legions or whatever. So you're getting the dancers are coming through, live music everywhere. Everyone seems to be in pretty good spirits, and it's a good time. Yeah.
Awesome. That sounds great. Are there a lot of Irish in Canada?
I guess
People
so.
with Irish descendants there?
I think we actually have a pretty good Irish population in Vancouver, but from what I know from a close friend, I think a lot of people, I don't know, young Irish people come here for a little bit at least.
Mm-hmm. Or the lineage, right? Like a lot of people.
Oh, and that for sure.
Yeah, like Chris and Joanna, you're part Irish, and I'm part as well. Ryan, are you part?
I'm mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. My mother's maiden name is McCormick. And Ryan is actually a family name. It's her mother's maiden name was Ryan. So it's lots of Irish here.
It's a wee Irish right there. Yeah.
Oh yes. Yes. Love that Irish stuff. I've never been to Ireland though. That's my one.
I know either.
It's a great
You
place.
said you neither, Brooke?
No, I was in Scotland.
Ooh.
Ireland. Yeah, it's on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great place. It's a great place.
It is a great place.
So Scotland. Different, but great.
What did you like about Ireland? What was the best part?
I've fortunately been to Ireland a couple times. I liked when we got out of the cities. And last time we were there, Chris and I and my folks, and we just drove to, I think, Killarney. Just all the green. I liked kind of all the winding roads. A lot of cliffs, like just the edges of the earth feel, really. I think that would probably be a top thing for me. And just get to get the freshest pint of Guinness you can. That doesn't hurt. So
True.
Yeah.
I think I've actually been to Ireland 6 times. And it's
my gosh.
Yeah, usually any trip I go to in Europe, we end up in Ireland. But to Joanna's point, if you get out of the cities, like Dublin is kind of just a big city. It's got some history, of course, but it's the smaller towns that are the most beautiful. So dramatic landscapes and cliffs. But all these little towns have some great pubs and live music. Again, a lot of history. Belfast is a really great city as well. So a lot of natural attractions, a rich culture. So great place to be.
That's awesome.
See, a really cool thing about those traveling to Europe is you get on a plane for 40 minutes and you get off, and then the architecture and the food, the music, the cultural shifts though are so dramatic, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, we get on a plane here in Vancouver for 40 minutes, we end up in Kelowna. Yeah. Quite similar to Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe Calgary, perhaps, but
that's definitely a bucket list place. Brooke, let's go. Let's get over there.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Sign me up while we can before November hits, right? And then it will be like shutdown mode again.
What? Not with that attitude. Gosh.
the pivot to positivity there.
Just being realistic, guys. Being realistic.
No.
All you can do all the things. Get a little crazy for the next 6 months.
Why November?
Oh, cold and flu season. And then I
Ah.
think something will like they'll restrict something or put some, I don't know.
Are you fortune telling right now or
Yes,
catastrophizing?
I am.
Okay, good. It's good that you recognize it.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is just speculation. Brooke doesn't have any special secret insider information or anything, right?
No, I was not texting with Bonnie Henry where she told me that in November, no, that did not happen. Bonnie Henry is our public health officer.
Ah,
Mhm.
got it. Well, okay, we'll get over there before November. Maybe. We'll see. We'll do a podcast from there. That sounds fun.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love that.
so fun.
Yes. Well, speaking of podcasts, maybe we should get into our topic.
Sure.
And Brooke is the ambusher tonight, right?
Sure am. I'm going to send it to Ryan right now. Are you
Okay.
ready?
Brooke knows the topic. None of the rest of us do. Here it comes.
All the way down there.
Okay. Okay. Well, I got to ask about this one, Brooke. All right. Here's the topic. Ethics. Hooray. What are some of the main ethical principles therapists adhere to? Are our ethical standards similar to other professionals? What are some common ethical dilemmas faced in counseling? Hooray.
So,
Hooray.
the reason this comes up, I know in my family, we have a saying called like dry as a popcorn fart. And sometimes that's what ethics is, dry as a popcorn fart. And but the reason
Please keep listening, everyone. Please.
just
Trying to pull all the stops right now.
but so recently for my registration body, the BCACC, BC Association of Clinical Counselors, there was a posting and I've applied to sit on the Ethics and Standards Committee. So I did a little interview with them last week. I find out tomorrow if I'm going to be on the committee, but it's been on my mind. They were asking me questions. I had to fill out this application. So I thought, you know what, let's have a discussion here about ethics.
That is hopefully not as dry as a popcorn fart, right?
Hopefully.
Therapists kind of grown a little bit at ethics, which I think it's not all that fair because ethics is a really important part of our work, of course. We each have to do continuing education to keep our licenses intact, right? And as a part of that, at least down here, some portion of that for psychologists here, we have to do 6 hours every 2 years of an ethics course. And it's kind of like traffic school in that people kind of go, oh, do I have to do this? Or, is this, but they try to spice it up a little bit, try to make it more interesting, but really ethics is pretty crucial and it's absolutely essential for our work to function. So I think it's a good topic, Brooke.
Yeah. And I do think or the population I work with, I still sometimes work with teens and there's extra ethical considerations there, or even young adults where, it might be different in different professions. So for example, a parent of a 21-year-old might call to book an appointment for their child, but technically, ethically, we're not really supposed to book that. It's the 21-year-old that needs to call in to book their own appointment. But I'm sure if that parent was calling to book a dentist appointment, a massage therapy appointment, I don't know if they would really question that. Yeah, so I think there's some extra things maybe that we have as therapists
Sure.
and clients. So general population that might be listening, there might be some things that you didn't realize, or you might go, oh, that's why my therapist isn't able to do that, or oh, I didn't realize that's maybe why they referred me, or whatnot.
It's true. There's a lot of life coaches out there, and not to talk badly about their profession. I think a lot of people are supported greatly by life coaches. They use a lot of solution-focused approaches and a lot of follow-up and encouragement. But sometimes they don't actually have a lot of the ethical considerations or guidelines that we have as therapists, right? So around confidentiality, for instance, or dual relationships, it's quite, and there's no actual governing body. So if you do have a concern in terms of the support that you got, there's no one that you can technically talk to you about that, right? Whereas we belong to colleges or associations that kind of offer that, those guidelines, as well as recourse or kind of a system to protect the rights and the safety of our clients.
That is true. So, gosh, should we do what we usually do and define ethics? That seems like a big topic.
I guess.
Big question.
I feel like that was assumed on what it was. I didn't think about defining it.
We might as well. Well, because I think there can be a confusion for some folks as well, because I think laws and ethics are sometimes people kind of see them as one and the same, and they're really not.
Mhm.
So a law is a legal standard that people have to abide by, or they can, face criminal consequences or some charges. So, stealing is against the law, right? That's something you can't do. Ethics are more about what they would call like the standard of practice. Like what is something that's expected of in this case, a therapist, these sorts of standards that we kind of agree to and try to uphold. And something may be unethical, but it's not necessarily illegal, for example.
Mhm.
And
it's a rule within our registering our associations.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And the reason why this is kind of an interesting area is there's oftentimes a lot of it depends when it comes to ethical issues. It's not always hard and fast. There can be a lot of gray area when it comes to some things. And what our ethics codes often say is, a professional in good standing will do their best to uphold these standards, and maybe that's by consulting with somebody, or, it may look different case by case, whether or not someone is acting ethically. So it's a little bit of a gray area at times. And so we'll just try to dive into what kind of the big ethical issues are when it comes to psychotherapy, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what are some of the big ones?
This is a big topic.
It is.
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality, yep.
Yeah, I think that's the top one, right?
Mhm.
That
Above all
is.
else, confidentiality.
Mhm.
And then, and Chris already mentioned like dual relationships. I think that's worth touching on as well.
Informed consent.
Yeah.
Like just getting appropriate consent and making sure clients know their rights when it comes to receiving counseling.
Yes. They're certain dual relationship kind of covers, but a big one in psychotherapy is the kind of romantic involvement. Any sort of sexual behavior is strictly prohibited when it comes to psychotherapists and their clients. That's a big one. So let's start with confidentiality, because that's really a big one for us. And some people don't realize that is such a high standard for us, that we have drilled into us from the first day of graduate school that it is so key, so important to have confidentiality remain kind of completely, the highest standard for us. So why do you think that is? What is that about?
Well, it's keeping everything private. If someone comes to talk to you about their most personal things, I think they want to be ensured that it's going to stay that way. It's going to stay private. It's not going to go public or anything like that. I don't know. That's what comes to mind. I feel like we wouldn't really be having anyone come to see us if there is risk of these things getting out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are limitations.
There's definitely some of the, I don't want to say magic therapy, but that's what I'm going to say, is knowing as well that this is completely private and confidential, like not just the risk of it being leaked or shared or whatnot, but like people can see us in utmost privacy. Like we really do take confidentiality, or often most therapists do, to I think a different level than other professionals, down to often offices aren't on a street level, because if an office was on a street level, then passersby could see you go in the door and would know that you're accessing counseling.
Yeah. But Ryan's old office actually had a setup where a client comes in one way and actually leaves the other way, right? So clients actually don't cross paths. Isn't that right, Ryan?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, my office had people would enter and come into the waiting room, and then I would open the door to the waiting room. They'd come into my office, we'd meet, and they'd exit a door that went directly out of the hallway, so they wouldn't have to go through the waiting room again. So if the next client was in the waiting room, they wouldn't see them. And a lot of the offices in my building were set up that way, just because of confidentiality.
Sorry, I was going to say not all offices are like that. Like the one we work in, it's a waiting room where you can sit across from other people. So yeah,
absolutely. And this is again is where we get into this stuff with ethics, where it's like, yeah, that's not a law that people can't, you can't walk through the waiting room, or that's even necessary, that people can't see one another or see that you're walking into someone's office. But it's something that because of the standard that we have on confidentiality, these are things that people might consider. So I like to say sometimes that we in this profession are professional secret keepers. That's kind of our role. And we have to take extreme care to make sure that we're not divulging identities of our clients to anybody. If we take notes, they have to be very heavily protected to make sure these notes don't go anywhere. No one's going to find out that someone's coming to us.
So down to just for listeners, if that's a paper copy, it's supposed to be like in a double locked procedure, which means it's like if it's in a file in a filing cabinet, the filing cabinet has to be locked. And then there needs to be another lock to even get there. So that would mean the front office needs to be locked, or wherever the filing room door would have to be locked. So there needs to be 2 layers of locking, and electronic files need to be encrypted. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. All of
There's
that.
also the other piece with confidentiality too, is where if you see one of your clients in public, you can't say hi to them unless they say hi to you first. So it's often good to give your clients a heads up on that. So it doesn't seem like you're trying your hardest to avoid them in a safe way. You may take that personally, but sometimes I don't think about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is true. If someone calls me on the phone and says, "Hey, I'm the brother of somebody. Is that person your client?" I can't answer that. I can't answer that.
Confirm or deny.
I can't confirm or deny that unless I have the written permission of my client. But even I can't even allude to the idea that I need to seek that permission from the client, because that would be giving it away, right? So I can't confirm or deny.
So that's safety, right? It's about the client feels safe sharing very personal information, as well as the fact you're talking to a therapist is their business. It doesn't have to be anyone else's, right? Mm-hmm. So they have the ability to keep that to themselves, keep that private.
And I think the principle kind of behind this ethical principle is trust. People need to know if they're going to share some intimate parts of their lives, they need to know that they can trust that the therapist is going to keep that secret. They're not going to blab it to anybody, or it's not going to leak out somewhere. And that's really the only way this is going to work. This relationship works is if there's that trust established, right? So part of the trust is knowing this person has a license. They have a governing board who is keeping tabs on them. And if they slip up and, share information with people, there will be consequences.
Yeah. So I was volunteering at a Rotary event this past weekend as a shred-a-thon. And our dad, Joanna and I's dad, has been on this podcast before. He's a psychologist. And he's also a Rotarian. So we're down there picking out these boxes of paper to get shredded for a good cause. And a fellow came up to me and he goes, hey, you know my son, so and so, Jimmy Jenkins. You're working with him, like upbeat and you're happy and just want to make that connection. It's like, I saw your dad there, and I work with your dad, and I know you work with my son. So you actually caught me off guard because I was picking up paper out of his trunk, and he had this information, and I guess he saw. I never met him before, but it actually caught me off guard, and I was like, did I actually? In that moment, I technically should have said, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." And I think I just kind of nodded it or just took it and said, "Oh, hey, how are you doing?" kind of thing, and try to divert the conversation in a different direction. But sometimes these ethical dilemmas pop up when you least expect them. You're kind of caught off guard a bit.
Chris, tell me that Jimmy Jenkins is a made-up word or made-up name.
Thanks for asking, Ryan. Jimmy Jenkins is a made-up name because of ethics. We can't use real names.
No.
So that name has been changed, completely changed.
Yes.
To hide his identity because we respect confidentiality.
Yep. And part of confidentiality would be and part of what gets in informed consent is that like we don't involve anyone else in the person's counseling unless they approve that we do, like in the decision-making process, or if they have a family member or someone else to get involved. Or if they're able to, any limits, or if doctors or anything, they need to kind of release, give a release of information. They have to sign something for that. So it's really puts the power in the client's hands when it comes to counseling for mostly everything. Again, there are limits, which we will go over, but yeah.
I did an event a few years ago, a storytelling event where therapists would tell stories about kind of impactful sessions that they had with their clients or relationships they had with their clients. And the first thing that we did, as I actually made every therapist sign that either the story that they were telling would be so wildly disguised that even the client themselves reading it wouldn't recognize themselves in the story, or that they had permission from the client to tell the story. And then there's a big disclaimer. If you look at the videos, the first thing that comes up on the video is the client's identities are disguised, or we have permission to use it. Just because that's so important. The stories are interesting, but it's not about revealing the information or the identifying information about the client. It's really about the therapist's experience in the room. But so just whenever you're hearing stories, even people write books about therapy, therapists will write books about what they've seen in therapy, you'll always see a disclaimer saying this is a conglomeration of several clients maybe, or or the person has given me permission to tell the story. It's just because it's really important for all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another little point I want to make before we talk about the limits of confidentiality is that I've known some clients who don't quite understand that the ethics of confidentiality applies to us therapists, but it doesn't apply to them. They can talk about therapy as much as they want. They can share who we are as a therapist if they want to. They have no ethics code for them based on confidentiality. If they want to talk about what they talk about in therapy, they're welcome to do that. Or if they see us out in public, they can come up to us and talk to us if they want to.
Mm-hmm.
We're the ones who have the license to protect. They don't.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Yeah. Yes.
For sure.
So the limits to confidentiality. We were getting into some gray areas a little bit here. So when are times when that confidentiality rule or ethics code is set aside?
Yeah, and that's essentially big three, right? So threat of harm to self, others, or any disclosure of abuse of a person under the age of 18.
Past or current.
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially when we need to breach this confidentiality clause in order to protect somebody.
Yep.
We need to protect the client from harming themselves, perhaps, or from hurting somebody else, or particularly if they talk about a minor being abused in some way or another, that's something that we need to. And by breaching confidentiality, it's more about, we're talking about talking to some authorities about that, sharing that information so that whoever's at harm or at risk will be protected.
Yes. Yeah. And that might look different depending on the situation. Yeah. Like if it's a adult who's threatening suicide or is a higher risk for suicide, then we're going to have to contact like their emergency contact person, or get them access to psychiatric care. Versus if there's a report of abuse of a minor, then we're going to have to call Child Protective Services.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, this is when I talk about the grace area here. This is where therapeutic judgment comes in and some of the challenges of this work. Because like, let's say you're working with a client who's been depressed for a long time and they say, yeah, sometimes I just wish this was all over. I just wish I, wasn't around anymore. That's not really, I mean, if we dive into that, we don't need to we don't make this all about suicidality, but something like a disclosure like that is not likely to trigger us to say, oh, I need to contact the authorities right away.
No, but it will trigger us to ask more questions. To decipher if we need to. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, risk assessment.
Yeah, risk assessment. Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I'm going to switch it. Oh, Chris, do you have another confidentiality? I was going to divert to dual relationships.
I was going to say, should we sing a song or something just to keep our listeners listening for our ethics conversation? Or
just repeat the words popcorn fart. That's, I think, just throw that in now and then. That keeps me entertained anyways.
So no one else uses that phrase is what I'm.
Oh, drier than a popcorn fart?
Yeah.
Oh, I've heard that before for sure. I just think it's worth bringing up a few times because
it's good. All right, we got it hooked in.
Yep.
They're still listening. All right, Brooke, take it away.
Carry on. Dual relationships. Another element. What are dual relationships? Why are they bad? What do those look like?
So again, to Ryan's point, like there's not laws, black and white, polarized laws. You use your best judgment, right? So I think we all work in big cities. There's lots of therapists in the areas. So usually there's no need to have a dual relationship in terms of seeing a client. Whereas in a small town, where there's only one counselor or therapist in the area, you may have to kind of approach that situation a little differently. So the idea of a dual relationship is that if you have a pre-existing relationship with the client, with the individual, then it's probably ethically best not to also have the role as their therapist.
Or if it's likely for an outside relationship, like if you're, one comes to mind, there was a gal that popped into my book, a teenager, and I recognized the mom's last name, and I looked into it and I was like, oh, this is a friend's sister-in-law, like a friend's niece, essentially. So I had to refer that client on, because if I go to my friend's birthday party, her niece is potentially likely to be there. Like I'm close enough to this friend that family members would be at the same gathering. And that would enter into a bit of a dual relationship there. Or if my friend were then talking about the situation in her sister-in-law's home, then that's going to make an issue.
Yeah, so you got to make that judgment call along the way. So I've been in situations like that too, where you meet someone and it turns out it was, for instance, a friend of my nephew's, one of his friends from school, and it was a decent probability that I may, see him at a similar event, like a birthday party or whatever it might be. So I decided just we talked about it and referred the client on. So you have to assess it, because sometimes it's like a friend of a friend of a friend, and it's far enough where like, okay, this should be fine, right? There's no pre-existing friendship, or this is not someone within your inner social network, right?
In Yeah, typically, like you said, big city is easy enough to avoid. Like it's funny, Chris, like you saw someone who knew our nephew. So it's just small world in terms of the community and people, we kind of, sometimes there's these 6 degrees of connection or less. But when it comes to small towns, there's not really a choice of multiple counselors. And so that's where dual relationships tend to be like, you know everyone. And so you might know your counselor in that way. So I think those are the only, like in a small town work where there's not accessibility to other therapists. I think that's one of the only situations where it's okay to have a dual relationship. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Right? There's not really another.
Yeah. Well, because
I think
ethically,
what someone has to make sure of, and this is again where this judgment comes in, and some of the gray area is there a potential for any harm, and that's where someone needs to take that into account. Like, let's say that again, the small town thing. You know, you're a counselor, you're the only therapist in a small town. You're seeing a client. The client comes in. Turns out that teacher that client is a teacher at your kid's school. Your kid's going to have that teacher at some point, right? You're talking about it with the client. You're trying to kind of assess to see is that problematic. Is there any other counselor that could see this person? What might the conflicts possibly be? If you find out after working with somebody for a while, oh yeah, they are in the same poker group as someone else that you see, could that be a problem down the road? Is that something that could potentially be harmful to that client? You know, are they have a conflict with the other client that you have, and now you're kind of caught in the middle? It's all about kind of assessing through that, and hopefully you're doing some consulting with other therapists about that, or even contacting everyone has insurance, and oftentimes you can consult with your insurance board to see, is this going to be a problem down the road?
for sure. In this day and age too, with virtual
Best
sessions.
of the client, right? It's
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
the
we didn't
best
hear you,
interest
bro.
of the client. Sorry, Chris. Cut you off.
Just quickly, Brooke, though, what did you say? Because you couldn't hear you because there's 2 people talking and your voice got cut out.
Oh, I was saying ultimately it's what's in the best interest of the client.
That's right. Yeah, and I was just saying, these days we've kind of, with COVID, we kind of normalized virtual counseling. So even people in small towns have access to lots of therapists in their state or province, whatever it might be. There's also like, we have implicit biases. We all have them as human beings. And when you start to know of someone, or you're connected to someone, it can actually impact the quality of the therapeutic experience, right? You may have preconceived notions that may impact your objectivity.
So how does that apply to this?
Well, again, back to that client I met who turned out to be a friend of my clients, or sorry, a friend of my nephew's. You know, as at his age, there's going to be some issues and challenges he's experiencing within school and his social network, right? So I may actually have a different perspective or views on it based on what he's saying, right? Or my responses might be biased based on the fact I know the fact that my nephew's involved with it.
Yeah, and you might be talking about, our nephew in that group. Like, it's just too much of a little, that would be awkward. It wouldn't be appropriate there.
Yeah, so I guess in even like a small town setting, you know of people. You may have, again, these prejudgments, or even though sometimes we're not aware of it, you may have quick reactions or ideas that pop into your mind because you have information about this person.
Yeah.
That makes sense? Yeah.
Yeah, your perspective as like a neutral observer gets skewed. It's harder to remain a neutral observer if you're familiar with the people that they're talking about, or the systems or whatever, because in your own mind, you've had experiences with those people. So you're no longer neutral. And that's not fair to the client always, right?
But just to note, in situations, I know we're talking a lot about small town stuff here. In a small town where everyone knows everyone and you're seeing a therapist, you as the therapist still have to do your best to operate like without a bias. Like, I think And then I think that is for everyone, part of our ethics code as well, is to not put our own biases on clients, or if they're talking about something that we might have different opinions on, it's for us to keep our own biases in check. So I think that's really challenged if you have no choice but to know a lot of these people who they're talking about. But even in our work, ethically, as part of respecting our clients and care for clients, we got to make sure we're not putting our own biases into the therapy, I think.
True. Absolutely. Yeah. Good point.
Small towns are I live in a big town, right? Pasadena, Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles area. I've been shocked and surprised at how many times through the years, say I'm working with somebody, I've been working with somebody for a long time, and they're like, oh yeah, I went to this party and I was talking to these people, and suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I know one of those other people. Like this, or I saw that other person maybe in therapy many years ago or something like that. It's like, wow, it's pretty amazing how really interconnected a lot of the world is. And these are, of course, things that I'm never going to share with this person, or share with that client, or say, oh yeah, I used to see that other person as a there. No, I'm never going to share that. But it is just an odd little coincidence sometimes how we see the world kind of weaving together, even in big towns,
Do you ever have it happen where you're talking to someone and they're coming to see you because a friend of theirs who's seen you, like they're recommended by someone who's seen you, and they don't say who, so you're just like, okay. But then maybe after, or it happens, just the community kids are in or whatever, all of a sudden you put together that, oh, I think I've actually seen that person, but they don't know that. Or it just, it totally interconnects quite a bit. But we often get, oh, like someone I know referred you, they've seen you, or they've heard good things. So they are fine with each other knowing that they have the same therapist. And sometimes we're the ones in the dark. But anyways, it's interesting.
True. It's intriguing. Yeah. Our practice is quite prominent in this suburb of Coquitlam or Tri-Cities areas. So it's not unusual where you have a client who's having issues with a bully at school, and you actually see that bully from their school.
Yep.
And obviously you have to keep that to yourself, but these situations do arise, right?
Mm-hmm.
That definitely gets into that gray area, doesn't it? Right? Like, is it a conflict of interest for you to see? Yeah, absolutely. So to be more blatant about some of these things, and like dual relationship stuff, like a therapist, you're seeing someone for therapy, and they are a auto mechanic, right? It's probably not a good idea for the therapist to say, oh, hey, I've got this car, can you work on it for me? And let's work out a deal here. Like, that's not, that gets too muddy. It can mess with the therapy in a lot of ways. Or let me hire you to, do some work around my house, or whatever it might be. Just try to, the idea is that we keep it clean, keep it as simple as possible, if at all possible, right?
Mm.
For sure.
Yeah, gifts get into that ethics part, receiving gifts from clients as well as giving gifts. That's different opinions on that, but that could be seen as not ethical.
Yeah, no, I think it's any trades of services is discouraged. I think it's not black and white though. I think I remember reading case studies about that, ethical case studies, and in certain circumstances it might be appropriate. You have to do your best to weigh the services and whatnot. But I think to your point, Ryan, it's probably best just to avoid those circumstances altogether.
Yeah, let's not invite the potential problems that might be involved with that if at all possible, right? But again, that's gray sometimes. So confidentiality, dual relationships, what else we got?
Joanna, what was yours?
I just said informed consent. I just like when you start at like with a counselor, they should review confidentiality. They should review how you can make or resolve any kind of issues you have with the therapist, or at any point, anyone you want to involve with therapy. Just letting them know, informing them of their rights as a client. And so that they can make a judgment call of, okay, I want to go forward with this.
Mhm.
So we have our due diligence to review those things when we meet someone. So that's part of it.
Yeah, right down to, how long is a session, and fees for service, cancellation policies, confidentiality waivers, how to make a complaint to our registering bodies, right?
Mhm.
Should you not be happy, here's what you do and how to report that. And yeah.
Yep.
There
So
we
this is
are.
Chris being a popcorn fart to spice things up for watchers, which he put on a filter of very pixelated glasses for those who are listening, not watching. Yeah.
I think another part of ethics would be just about our duty in terms of respectful care, just respecting clients and care for clients. So we got to make sure that we're not going to see people for issues that are outside of our wheelhouse or that we're not knowledgeable, about, and that we would consult as necessary and, refer on if necessary. So that's all part of. So when people go to see therapists, to trust in the fact that this person is legit, that they know what they're doing. And if they don't, they would be upfront with that and refer on. So that's all part of it.
Point. Yeah. You're competent in that area. Yeah.
That is true.
Mhm.
Okay. Informed consent is important. Let's talk about the romance component for a second here too, because that's something that some clients are concerned about, because I talked about this in an article a while back called A Client's Guide to Transference. And transference is this kind of this thing that happens in therapy, and I also believe it happens in a lot of life, where we just sort of we have some feelings about somebody, or we start to relate to somebody in a way that's sort of familiar to us, or it has something to do with something going on, some of our needs, or something that we want, or we're perceiving, even though it might not actually be happening in reality. So let's say that you sit down next to a friend, sit down next to someone on the bus, and they remind you of your friend from high school, and then you start talking to them like they're your friend from high school. You're kind of transferring something onto that person. Or more commonly, it's like you have, maybe you had a parent who was a really harsh authoritarian parent, and then you have bosses at work, and you kind of assume that they're going to treat you the same way. This is the shorthand transference thing. Sometimes people fall in love with their therapist, and sometimes that has more to do with what's going on in the client's world. Maybe they've just never been listened to before, never been, someone pay that much attention to them. They've always wanted that, so they really long for that, and so they fall in love with their therapist. And I think a well-trained therapist will be able to handle that and work with that, and talk to them about that, and see how these are unmet needs that are finally being met for the client. And of course, it feels good to have someone listening to you and paying attention and caring for you in this way. However, there's also a boundary here, and it will never go beyond just these feelings and thoughts that will never be acted upon. And it's so crucial, so important for clients to know that the therapist is not going to step over the line and take advantage of those feelings, or ask the client out. If the therapist starts to develop feelings for the client, there's always an ironclad law. In this case, it is a law as well as an ethics code. You just cannot do that in this line of work.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it's not appropriate to be friends with your clients. Like, once you actually get along with them, I think we have to wait a couple years after, if like, should anyone ever want a friendship with someone, but that's not the case, that's encouraged. But it's like, in terms of like even sharing your number with the client and being able to communicate outside, or I've heard of some situations where people want to be friends with their therapist or try to connect with them outside. And so sometimes boundaries there are tough, but that's, again, not something that a client or a counselor would encourage if those boundaries are wanting to be crossed.
Is it 4 years?
I thought it was 2.
Yeah, I thought it was 2 as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
after
the purpose
your final session.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a law, a date, a time limit in the States. I think there's just an idea that we should try to keep the relationship professional, because you never know, even if the therapy ends, that person might need therapy again at some other point in their life, and they want to go back to therapy. And as their therapist, we should be able to be available to them, not as their buddy. There's some sort of a little bit of a guideline when it comes to like dating a client in the States, where they would say there would have to be at least 2 years of no contact with the person. But even then, if it is ever brought to light, it'll come up to a licensing board, and they will definitely frown upon that. So
Not good.
Yeah. Not encouraged
no.
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. A big part of that is the power differential. So what's happened, I mean, through the course of therapy, the therapist learns an incredible amount about the client, and the client doesn't learn tickety-boo about the therapist, right? So naturally, there's a power differential where you're not on an even playing field there. So they seem to think that the magic time is going to fix that or recorrect that, but it doesn't. You're still, one person knows a lot more about the other person, which creates a power dynamic, and that's unhealthy to start with.
Well, and again, these principles are in place to protect clients. It's more to protect clients than it is to protect therapists. And the idea here is we don't want any opportunity for a therapist to take advantage of that power differential, right?
Yeah.
So that's why that's there. Yes. So no dating. In fact, we're supposed to hand out a little pamphlet to clients, or at least include that in the consent, that this pamphlet exists, that says the title of it is just "Professional Therapy Never Includes Sex." That's the title of the pamphlet, and that can be found online if you want to see it. That's just right up front. That's not going to be the case.
Okay. That's interesting that it there needs to be a pamphlet.
Yep. There is that pamphlet.
Yeah, maybe it depends on the modality that you use and the length of therapy. Like I think of Irv Yalom's book, The Gift of Therapy, and he talks very candidly. If he senses any type of dynamics there that might be unhealthy, then he talks about it, right? He hashes it out with the clients. But yeah, it's interesting. Up here, I don't think we've seen pamphlets like that. I think a lot of us use more short-term types of modalities as well. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Maybe.
Something to be very aware of, though.
Yeah. Well, my type of work is a very relational style, right? Kind of a relational psychodynamic style, where I have no problem disclosing some things about my life and talking with clients, as long as it's in the service of the therapy, as long as it's helpful for our work together. And I certainly do feel like I form a close tie with a lot of my clients, and that's a very rewarding part of the work. But also, we need to know that this is a professional relationship, and there are some limits here as well. And really, in the end, we know that the relationship is all really about serving them. It's not about serving me.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. If I have unmet friendship needs or relational needs, it's up to me to meet those outside of therapy, with the people in my life, right?
That's why we do this podcast, right? That's why we
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I meet with you guys so I don't end up dating clients. I'm just kidding. Jeez. What other sort of interesting ethical issues are there? I guess those are kind of the big four. Anything else that comes up?
Yeah.
What comes up? Oh, go ahead, Brooke. Yeah.
No, I was going to say there's tons. I mean, little nuances and things, but I think those are some really great big categories that things then fall under.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris.
I've had to be very aware of ethics when it comes to family counseling, especially in situations where parents are separated or divorced.
Mm,
So confidentiality is gigantic, but sometimes there's parental agendas, and they see the therapist as an advocate for what is best for the kid, and in their minds, what's best might not be the same as what the other parent thinks is best. So I think there can be dilemmas that arise from those circumstances. So I think the way that I've dealt with that in the past is just having extremely clear boundaries before counseling begins, in terms of how the child is the primary client. And if there are certain dynamics that start to develop, then you have that's communicated very effective, immediately and effectively, and you respond accordingly, just so you're not sucked into a bit of a legal dynamic that might be detrimental or impact the child in a negative way.
Right.
So make sure that, yeah, confidentiality and the role of the therapist is or the therapy is clearly defined, right?
Yep. That is very, very good stuff. I'll throw another one out there, which has to do with the ending of therapy, what we call the termination of therapy. There's also an ethical standard around the idea of abandonment, right? A therapist shouldn't just kind of out of the blue suddenly fire a client, right, without any sort of explanation, or you know, they need to give other resources or other referrals to other therapists. You know, for example, like let's say we're talking about one of these dual relationships. Something comes up and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't see this client. I've seen this client 5 times, but I can't see them any longer because you know, I've been seeing their ex-wife for 3 years, and this is
he knows Jimmy Jenkins.
He knows Jimmy Jenkins, and Jimmy Jenkins is yeah. So you can't just like call up the client and say, oh, no more sessions, goodbye. You know, that would be abandonment. You have to say, look, I'm sorry, but it turns out that I'm not going to be able to see him any longer, but here are some other referrals, and it's just, you know, circumstances beyond my control. Something like that, where it's a softer handing off really to somebody else instead of just suddenly cutting someone off, right?
Mm-hmm.
it's
Good one. Yeah.
it's
great.
interesting though, because clients don't need to terminate with us necessarily. We like, it's not the
Nope.
same way. You could just stop going to therapy if you want. There's no pressure to have to explain it, but so there's no pressure there.
That's true. That's true. Clients could you could leave voicemail, or I guess just no
Or just not
show,
show
or
up again.
Yeah, ghosting happens.
Mhm.
Yep. See person once, or maybe they weren't you feel like the therapist is not a good fit for you, or maybe you just feel good and you stop going. Like that happens all the time. It's really, yeah. But if there was an actual issue where you as a therapist wanted them to go elsewhere, yeah, you'd probably have to let them know that.
Absolutely. Therapists should also be practicing within their scope of competence, right? My example is that if someone came to me with a severe eating disorder, that's not really my area of expertise. And so I know people who are much more experienced and have much more expertise in that. So it would be my ethical duty to say, I hear what you're dealing with. I'm sorry that that's actually not my area, but here's some names of other people for you to go see. If I were to proclaim myself to be an expert, or to say, oh yeah, sure, I can help you with that, I guarantee I'll fix that in 3 sessions or less. I mean, any of those things are just not ethical, and we can't be telling people that we have expertise in areas we don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good one. For sure. I know sometimes, again, gray area. I've worked for community agencies, and government programs, and sometimes you have clients who don't have access to other means of therapy. So you may have 10 or 20 sessions to help support the family or the individuals the best way you can. So it can be a bit of a difficult situation there at times, because there are some great experts out there, but sometimes it costs money to go see them, right? So trying to offer the best support you can, with the understanding that, hey, you do have a specialty, you do have a focus that you should be gravitating towards. So.
There
Mhm.
we go. There we go.
Yeah,
Hey, how about those popcorn farts, everybody?
Yeah, I feel like
it's
there's
actually
a lot. Yeah.
great conversation. Who would have guessed that ethics would be such an engaging conversation?
There you
It's
go.
yeah. I think Brooke mentioned like we have a like for our governing body, we have a code of ethics, like it's a booklet, like it's quite in detail. So we therapists who it's serious business, making sure we're taking care of people in the appropriate way. So there's a lot there. And it's a good topic.
It is a good topic.
Even though Chris is getting distracted by all the Zoom filters.
Oops.
Yes, if you're going to become a therapist, as dry as it might be, it's really crucial that you understand these ethics, because they do arise all the time, and it's
Yeah.
something that we need to be aware of and competent and dealing with these things, because it's just going to be a part of the work that we do, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Chris and Joanna have filters of animals on their screens. Chris has a little dog and Joanna has a bird.
Boy,
I think we've done pretty good with this topic. I don't know. I don't know if anything else is coming up. I think this might be time where
This might be the wrap up. Natural.
okay. Well, we're not going to wrap up without at least plugging the fact that we're doing book club next time.
Yes.
And the book is The Gift of Regret.
Power of Regret. Oh,
Power of Regret. I think it's Power of Regret.
Yeah.
Daniel Pink is the author. Power of Regret. And I think you're going to enjoy it. If you guys haven't read it yet, I think you'll like it. It's good stuff. So we're going to talk about that next. But for now, we're going to wrap up with this popcorn fart of a topic. And I hope we did some justice. Hope we buttered it up a little bit. Okay. All right. So that's it for now. Like and subscribe, Apple, Google, Podbean, Audible, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube. Send your questions to info@mentalhealthbootcamp.com. Visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Tell a friend or two. And that's it for us. Good night, everybody.
bye
Good night,
everyone.
everybody. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.